At the top of a mountain wrapped in mist, there stood an ancient monastery made of gray stone and aromatic wood. There lived Master Tenzin, an elderly monk with serene eyes and a slow, measured voice, whose mere presence soothed even the most restless heart. One morning, a young man named Daiki arrived at the temple, his face marked by anxiety and the hurried steps of someone who has sought answers everywhere. He bowed before the master and said, "I have traveled for days without rest. I have crossed rivers, valleys, and cities, searching for one thing, calm. Please teach me how to find it." Tenzin looked at him in silence for a long moment, as if listening beyond the words. Finally, he replied, "Calm is not found on the road. It is not hidden in caves, nor is it sold in markets. Because calm, my boy, is not something you seek. It is something you remember." Daiki furrowed his brow, confused. "Remember it? How could I remember something I have never had?" Tenzin slowly stood up, leaning on his bamboo staff, and gestured for him to follow. They began to descend a stone path that wound through the trees. "Come," said the master. "You don't need to understand yet. You only need to walk." As they walked among pines and cherry trees, the silence of the forest embraced every step. The song of the birds, the crunch of dry leaves beneath their feet, and the murmur of the wind through the branches seemed to form an invisible melody that enveloped everything. Tenzin stopped by a small stream of crystal-clear water. He slowly crouched, cupped some water in his hands, and let it flow between his fingers. "Look at this stream," he said. "Do you think it worries about where it's going? Do you think it struggles to find its way?" Daiki shook his head, not fully understanding. "Then why do you?" The master continued. "Calm is like water. It isn't forced. It isn't trapped. It simply flows when we stop interfering." The young man sat on a rock silent. For a few minutes, he simply listened. The water flowing, the wind dancing, the birds talking to the sky. For the first time in a long while, he felt no need to ask. And in that moment, although he didn't know it yet, something inside him began to remember. Master Tenzin watched him in silence, with the patience of one who knows that bamboo does not grow faster by pulling on it. After a long while, Daiki spoke, almost in a whisper. "It's strange here, doing nothing. I feel a peace I didn't feel during my entire journey." "Why?" Tenzin smiled. "Because you've stopped searching. The act of searching is, in itself, a form of agitation, like stirring water with your hands, expecting to see the clear reflection of the sky. Only when the water settles on its own does the reflection appear." Daiki lowered his gaze, touched the surface of the stream, and saw his face. He realized that his expression was no longer the same as when he arrived. There was less tension, less urgency, as if the echo of the forest had begun to clear the noise from his mind. "So, calm is inside me?" he asked. "It always has been," the master replied. "But in the bustle of the world, we forget it. It's not something new you must learn. It's something old you must remember." The afternoon slowly descended upon the forest, tinting the leaves with golden and ochre hues. The master and the young man walked in silence back to the temple. Each step was slower than the last, as if Daiki no longer had any rush to get anywhere. Upon arrival, Tenzin offered him a steaming cup of tea. They sat on the wooden porch, facing the horizon that opened between the mountains. Neither spoke for a long while. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, but soft, like a warm blanket over the soul. Finally, Daiki broke the silence. "For years, I thought calm was something I had to achieve. Read books, follow methods, control my thoughts, but now I feel that, instead, it was about letting go of all that." Tenzin nodded with a slight movement of his head. Many seek calm as if it were a reward at the end of effort. But it's the opposite. Calm appears when you stop fighting. It is not conquered, it is allowed. Daiki watched the sky turn violet. Something in his chest opened, effortlessly. A tenderness, a softness that didn't come from outside, but from deep within. And then he understood he wasn't learning how to be calm. He was remembering how it felt to inhabit it. That night, Daiki slept in a small room at the temple, with no luxuries, just a mat, an oil lamp, and the distant sound of crickets. He closed his eyes and, for the first time in a long time, he was not chased by thoughts. The silence did not weigh on him. It embraced him. At dawn, Master Tenzin was waiting for him in the garden, sweeping the fallen leaves. Daiki approached, bowed his head in respect, and without needing to ask anything, took another broom and began to help. Neither spoke. It wasn't necessary. The movements were slow, mindful. Each leaf picked up was like a cloud dissipating within the young man. The present became enough, complete. After a while, Tenzin said, "When you were a child, do you remember those moments when you would watch the clouds or the flight of a butterfly without thinking about anything else?" Daiki smiled faintly, his eyes moist with a memory that returned like a whisper. "Yes, I remember feeling at peace without knowing why." "That is calm," said the master. "You didn't lose it. You just drifted away from it by believing that you had to do more to be worthy of feeling it." The sun began to filter through the branches of the trees, painting the ground with dancing shadows. Tenzin and Daiki walked toward the temple's orchard, where vegetables and wildflowers grew. The master pulled weeds gently, as if each gesture were a prayer. "Why do we live forgetting the essentials?" asked Daiki, watching a bee hover among the flowers. "Because we learn to look outward," replied Tenzin. "We are taught to desire, to compete, to fear. But no one teaches us to remain still. No one reminds us that, in silence, we are already whole." The young man stood in thought. He had believed that he had to do something to be calm. Deserve it, capture it, build it. But there, on the earth, with his hands covered in dust and his heart at peace, he began to see with new eyes. "So, what should I do when I forget again?" he asked, with a note of fear in his voice. Tenzin smiled gently. "Just stop, breathe, and listen. Calm has never left. It only hides behind the noise, and silence is the key that awakens it." That afternoon, as the sky became covered with clouds soft as wool, Daiki sat alone under an old larch tree. He closed his eyes, leaned his back against the trunk, and simply breathed. He wasn't trying to meditate. He wasn't trying to achieve anything. He was simply there. Each inhale brought him back, to himself, to that silent place he hadn't known he carried inside. He was no longer the anxious young man who climbed the mountain searching for answers, nor the pilgrim who thought calm was a distant destination. He was simply someone who was beginning to remember. Remember that calm didn't depend on external circumstances, that it wasn't a state reserved for the wise or the holy. It was a forgotten memory, buried beneath years of noise, expectations, and hurry. And in that moment he felt a tear run down his cheek. It wasn't of sadness, nor even of joy. It was the tear that rises when something deep returns home. The next day, when the sun barely touched the horizon, Daiki said goodbye to the master, not with long words or solemn gestures, just a humble greeting, a crossing of serene gazes, and a respectful bow. "Will I lose my calm again, master?" he asked. Tenzin responded with a voice that seemed to come from the wind itself. "Perhaps, but now you know it's not far. It just sleeps within you, waiting to be remembered." Daiki smiled, and with a calm step, he descended the same path he had arrived on. The world he was returning to hadn't changed. There would still be noise, challenges, confusion, but something in him had changed. He no longer chased calm. He carried it with him, because he had finally understood that calm is not sought. It is remembered.